Sorry for this. Um, loading up, loading up. I'm just gonna move it over here so I can see it. Sorry for this. Okay,
No
there we go.
worries, man.
Perfect. All right. Um, Now we begin. Got it. So it's being live streamed. All right. So again, once again, good afternoon. Thank you, Azania, for joining us on the Global Black Forum. This is episode number 4. And I'm really trying to, the purpose of this podcast or platform again is just to, I would say, like to educate, enlighten, and more so connect different generations across the African diaspora, no matter where we are in the world. Um, you being based in Cape Town, me here in Washington, D.C., on a Washington, D.C. suburb, um, focused on international affairs, specifically researching Azania, or South Africa, as we now call it. Um, again, it's a pleasure to be connected with you. It's a pleasure to virtually meet you. And again, thank you in advance for all that you do.
That is all mine, Laquan.
Okay. Um, So I'm gonna briefly introduce you, and then we could just again just jump into the questions to make the most of the time.
Lovely.
Okay. Azania Tyhali is originally I don't know if you're originally from Cape Town, but I know you're based in Cape Town.
I'm based in
And,
Cape Town.
okay. And I know that you are a graduate student at the Western University of Western Cape, currently pursuing your master's degree focusing on migration and mobility within the confines of blackness and decolonization, which I love and is very much needed, as I would hope everybody around the world would know. Um, you link questions around mobility with freedom, turning the gaze of migration away from the superficial perspective to the structural reading of migration as consequences of colonialism and imperialism, again, which is very much needed. And I know that per your background and bio, you believe that theory cannot be divorced from praxis, and you've participated in a number of movements, namely the Fees Must Fall movement, as well as I believe the worker struggle in the University of Western Cape. Um, and you are part of a civil organization, couple of civil organizations. I'm about to get to them. The Black National Crisis Committee, which advocates for Black South Africans' interests through lobbying. And most, I would say, for the sake of this interview, most importantly, you are, correct me if I'm wrong, the national spokesperson for the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. And Azania,
Certainly.
okay. And again, that's, I'm not going to, stop saying this, but again, it's really an honor just to have your time, considering the work that your organizations have done and are doing, and knowing again that, again, we're walking in the same direction in terms of, being a part of the movement. I wish that I could be in the country more, but right now I'm just limited in a researcher role. But again, I will, see you soon, Lord willing. And beyond this, beyond all of your duties, you are also a liberation or part of a liberation jazz band, Iphupho'lika Biko. So would you like to tell
Yeah.
us what that means?
It's Iphupho'lika Biko. So in essence, it's a Biko's dream, So it's the jazz band. Yeah. So that is the dream. So Iphupho is a dream, Lika Biko, which is Steve Biko, the father of Black consciousness in South Africa. So the band comes at a very tricky time of our lives, when we're trying to navigate our blackness, and trying to make sense of art and politics, So the band comes into existence that it is founded by one of my brothers in Revolution and brothers in song, Unhlanhla. He's based in Joburg as well. So yeah, that is who we are, the band in essence.
So one, again, that's amazing. And I didn't put this on my question list that I sent you, but I did also want to speak about Steve Biko. So you kind of, just open the door. So well, I'll circle back around to it. But the first question I wanted to ask you, again, I think you might have mentioned it. Which part of the country are you originally from? And what was your childhood and teen years like? And what was your thoughts about the country as you grew up?
Lovely stuff. Firstly, let me thank you once again, Daquan, for the opportunity and this platform once more. Definitely does mean a lot for me when Blacks across the continent, are connecting on Love Wild. Especially when we are discussing issues of such nature, it definitely does mean a lot for me. But in hindsight, I am Azania Tyhali. I am born in the Eastern Cape, which is another state in South Africa. You normally refer to them as states, but it's a province in South Africa, one of the 9 provinces in the country. This is where I grew up. I would, however, then, as you would see with my interest or my study area, I would move around the country a lot as a migrant. But how I grew up then, I grew up from a typical Black household with a single mother, with sisters as well. So there was a lot that was happening, considering that South Africa is a fatherless nation. So I had so much anger as a child whilst growing up, trying to understand those things, and also just as a Black young woman in South Africa, just angry, typically of how our livelihood was, which would then inform my activism at a later stages of my life, because I had silly little questions that any other Black child who grows up in the midst of poverty would have, questions of what are elders doing when you are hungry? You would assume that elders would go and seek for jobs, they must go seek for jobs. If there's no money to pay for your fees, you would anticipate that your mother would make a plan, considering that they're elders, without understanding that in actual fact, we're existing at the belly of the beast, there was in actual fact, an upper hand that controlled our lives, which is the white supremacist capitalist patriarchal system in which we existed. I would later make sense of this as I would later come to university, because even coming to university as well, I come at a later stage of my life, and this is of course on its own. These are not poverty politics, believe you me, but this is just a big background of who I am. So I come to university at a later stage. This is in my early 20s, of course, because I was forced to then take a gap year because there was no money to go to school. So it only made sense for me that I would have to go seek a job so that I would make means to come to university. So I then come to university. So insofar as my teenage years are concerned and my upbringing are concerned, I normally would say that I don't really have fond memories of what it is to be a teenager or the normalcy of teenagehood or childhood, because in hindsight, there were many things that hindered one from having what you would deem as a normal childhood. But in hindsight, as I grow old and as I become conscious, Black conscious, I'm a Black radical feminist and a Pan-Africanist, I became very much aware of the fact that these things in actual fact are things or factors that were beyond our control, but these were things that were therefore created by the system in order for us as Black people to find ourselves in the position that we find ourselves in, displaced, dispossessed, and our landlessness, and how we are even positioned in society in its entirety. So coming to university then, is a way of me of saying that, and as a response of saying, look, I definitely have a different imagination of what it means to be young Black in South Africa, which is to go to university, because these are some of the things that we've always been denied from the generation of our mothers, the Bantu education to the current education system that we have. You would then have imagined that post-1994, things were going to be much easier, considering that education in South Africa was somewhat seen as a tool for social mobility, even though that is an engagement for another day, But in hindsight, that is who I am. And I come to activism, not only at university, but also where I come from, because as I had stated earlier, that I had to take a gap year outside of university post my matric. This is what after my high school. So we had various programs that we wanted to do, but again, it fell back to the question of money, also the society in which we were in, that did not fully allow us to do those things. Hence, then I had to find myself as a sojourner in South Africa, moving from one place to the other. And of course, I cannot trace this anywhere else beyond my family's trajectory. because we are also a generation that comes from Lesotho that later had to move to South Africa because of, you know, the struggles that they had faced in that other side of the world.
So again, just thank you for sharing all of that. To me, it's perfect context, and it makes sense because again, it allows me to connect the dots. And I really wanted, you know, our audience just to know from you, you know, exactly, you know, who you are, and I would say the steps that, you know, would lead to, or the groundwork or foundation, or rather the roots, as some would say, that, you know, create this wonderful and lovely tree of life, that you are, that we are, that we are part of, you know, as within our African diaspora. You said a couple of things that I wanted to follow up on quickly. Again, just your upbringing, again, I think is very unique, but like you said, again, it's not exclusive. You know, other people have also experienced some of the same things. And again, without me projecting, you know, my thoughts and stuff like that, obviously me being, again, speaking from, as much as I hate to say it, an American vantage point. Again, obviously a member of the diaspora, but I still have my American lens. There are different things that I notice, you know, that affect all communities in different ways. But again, like you said, they're systematic. I also grew up in a single mother household. So again, I guess we could say what is it, the trend of fatherlessness, or, you know, the absence of, you know, fathers. Again, that happens for various reasons, sometimes because of them, sometimes again because of more so structural things. And again, I know in the South African context, you didn't mention this specifically, but how, I guess we could say, you did mention this, in a post-apartheid society, one would think that, especially again from the outsider's perspective, from the international community, the way that the media talks about it, the way that some educators, academics, researchers talk about it, is everything magically got better, like poof, once, you know, democracy, you know, was installed, and there was now Black leadership instead of I don't even want to say traditional, but the white, or predominantly white, minority white leadership within the country. Can you just speak to, really briefly, your opinion again about that, I guess we could say, misconception, you know, from people, again, the outside, they talk about it as, again, South Africa is all better, which again, there's progress, it's development, a lot of development, a lot of businesses, you have the Black economic empowerment programs and stuff like that. But again, there's still major, I guess I could say, one, inequality, and then two, what I like to say is pretty much just classism. You know, everybody that looks like you in South Africa doesn't live the same life. And you have some people who have more access and privileges based on, I guess we could say, their paradigm, or, you know, what the Western's notions of superiority that they might subscribe to, versus other people, I would say, like yourself, who are much more comprehensive and, as they would say, radical, in terms of, again, your consciousness of, again, what it means to be a Black woman, your consciousness, what it means to be a Black person in South Africa.
Look, Laquan, I think for me, there really is a lot that can be said insofar as the political landscape of South Africa is concerned, but especially concerning our democracy. And of course, I say this because I come from the Azanian school of thought, and there are two schools of thought in South Africa which exist. There's the South African school of thought, and there's also the Pan-Africanist school of thought, which is the Azanian school of thought, that the school that I'm from. And when you find then and look into our democracy and how the South African school of thought has been able to convince the outside world, therefore, of our democratic outlook insofar as us having attained freedom. And this, again, we cannot trace it anywhere but on the foundation of the liberation movements of South Africa. And we cannot trace it anywhere else outside of the liberation movement that then comes into power, which is the African National Congress. The African National Congress is then founded upon the Charterist document, which is, of course, it's a Marxist outlook. It's an engagement that I'm willing to have with other people on another day. But of course, if you're aware of that Charterist document, of course, it is founded on the notion that the country belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And if you understand then how Marxism works, right, which is the primary contradictions as per the Marxists, it is capital and it is the class. So according to Marxists, therefore, the worker or the wage is just an interim relief of the worker, and how therefore the worker gets dehumanized because of the capital, which is where we come in as the Pan-African or the Azanian school of thought and the PC block to say that, look, we understand that, yes, there might be class contradictions that we find ourselves in that are predominant and that are existing, very much so. But equally, we cannot negate the fact that South Africa is founded on racial capital. And I think Robin D. Kelly writes on this, and others as well before him who wrote on racial capital in South Africa and its foundations, therefore. And this is also where the problem is, because if you then look into this analogy that I'm coming to with insofar as the ANC is concerned, so with them being able then to convince the world of the fact that there has been a change insofar as the cosmic is concerned, but there's not been the change insofar as the system is concerned, which is where, once again, we disagree and we find ourselves in, because even with the outside world, therefore, their outlook of South Africa is founded on the notion that South Africa is this rainbowist nation, and with it being a rainbow nation, you would then assume that people are living in harmony. People are sharing on their country's wealth and they're sharing on their country's resources. You would assume, therefore, that people are still living in equal relations to each other, whereas it's totally a different take and a different case. And if you look then into the foundations, therefore, of the racial capital and the coming of the ANC into power in South Africa, and this is where the problem begins, and this is where you find that there are still very much that exist in South Africa, primarily because of these historical contradictions that have not been resolved between the whites and equally the blacks of South Africa. And these systematic issues, the failure, therefore, to address them has been primarily of those who are in power, because if you look into Du Bois, he sums it up beautifully to say that the problem of the 20th century, it is the problem of the color line. But equally, we must stress Du Bois further when it comes to our relations and to our country in South Africa, to say that even post the 20th century coming to the 21st century, we still have the color bar, which causes the contradictions that we find ourselves in South Africa. All right. So what we want to say, therefore, and to the world in actual fact, and people that have this different outlook of South Africa, it would be to say that perhaps people need to engage themselves more concerning South Africa and not really be looking into, because also there's this thing that most of the world likes to do. There's this over-reliance on the media instead of the over-reliance on the people at grassroots level. And I think this is also the problem that we have with the global community as well. Even if you look currently, this is just a reference that I would like to put on point, which is what is happening in Palestine. There's different views. Some are saying that these things are not happening, and people are mostly relying on media. And if you understand it, therefore, what media has always done, and its role, it is also just to make sure that the views of those that control the means of production are always the views that, are out there, which is where we find ourselves in South Africa. And what I equally appreciate perhaps about you is the fact that with the work that you're doing, it therefore allows people to then tap into the reality of many South Africans in the country. Because the same very view that majority of people in the United States or even in the world have of the US, right? Because one would assume that Black people are having it easy in the US. But once again, you check the other corner, there's George Floyd who's being killed by the police. And there's always all of those instant things. And Black people, once again, have to stand out on the streets to say that, look, we are human, we are beings too, hence then the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So what then is happening insofar as Black lives are concerned in the US, it is precisely what is happening in the South African context. And again, I draw this out of these historical contradictions that have not been resolved between the white settler and the Black South Africans. So these are the primary contradictions that still exist, because even those that are in power today, they are so much in power. So to make sure that they are just administrators of the system, they're not really interested in so far as changing the system and how it functions, because to them, we are oppressed based on our class and still not oppressed because of our racial contradictions, in which are the founding basis of this racist country that we live in, of South Africa. I'll just pause there for now.
No, it's again, you could definitely keep going, and I was just waiting to jump in because I wasn't going to interrupt you. A couple of things I'm gonna speak very fast, just because again I want to continue to ask you questions. You connected a lot of dots, a lot of dots. I'm just gonna start from the beginning to the most recent, as I remember in my mind. Like you said, the distinction between the ANC, and we're about to get to it. My next question is about the PAC. The distinction again between what it means to be a Marxist. A lot of us have this idea, us meaning people around the world, people who again consider themselves progressive, radical, however you view yourself. People don't necessarily understand that one can be a Marxist and still oppress and subjugate people who look like us, which is exactly what's happening in the South African context. And I would say it again from my novice perspective as a researcher. Again, as you mentioned, between again the ideas around the Freedom Charter, what was inherent in the Freedom Charter is, again, the Marxists were trying to provide land for everybody, saying, again, if you're white or black, the land belongs to you. Whereas the PAC would say something like Iphupho'lika, where again, like obviously the land belongs to the Africans, not necessarily settlers who are white, who came from out of nowhere and created wars, colonized, pillaged, raped, and did a bunch of other things. Again, that like you said, is for another day. And someone like, again, Sobukwe was very explicit when mentioning that, as opposed to his contemporary who gets propped up as, not to be disrespectful, but someone like Mandela who conceded and who went along with the program of the people who, again, have pretty much led to the status quo. So that's just something that I wanted to say firstly. And again, going back to, as you mentioned, Du Bois, who I'm using as the framework for my dissertation, for my research on South Africa. The American context, a lot of people, some know this, some people don't know this, and some would say this, I'm not trying to put words in their mouth, but I would say this myself, this is my version of it. America and South Africa has a lot in common in terms of how, the Black people are marginalized and oppressed, and they use the idea and the notion of racialism as a Band-Aid, as a buffer, and then they sprinkle it with the politics, to where, again, they separate us based on politics, to where, again, this is what I would say, as we now here in 2024, approaching the 30th year anniversary of the fall of apartheid in South Africa. And this is, again, I guess we could say a century and maybe 150 years or so after, maybe 170, 160 something years after the Civil War in America. Things have gotten worse. Even though, again, there's progress, we have an Obama, which is pretty much just like y'all have Mandela. We have, I always say these, the celebrities, I'm not going to call out anybody's names. I usually say the musicians that I'm familiar with, but we have these Black celebrities, and we have some Black people who have like obscene amount of wealth, but the majority of us, even those like myself who has a master's, who goes to school, who, is trying to, most people have 2, 3, 4 jobs or 2, 3 side hustles just to be able to make ends meet. So again, for people who look like us, again, things have not necessarily gotten better, even though we could shop in the malls that the white people shop in, or we could buy or rent houses next to white people, or all this other stuff that they use. As you said, pointing to the media perpetuates the status quo. And again, the layperson, or depending, again, like you said, I like how you framed it, the two schools of thought, again, in America or within the world system, there's also these schools of thought where you have people who say, no, 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 the media is informing people, the media is doing this, the media is doing that. But again, if we're being honest, the media is owned by billionaires. And these billionaires, they create these cartels, if you will, where they work in concert, again, to make everybody believe one thing while they're taking the resources, the diamonds, the gold, the oil, the cobalt, the coltan from places like, you know, the 54 or 55 nations in Africa, and nobody says anything because we keep pointing to these little things as markers of progress. So that's just something I wanted to say really quickly, again, just to let you know that I agree with you. And again, I love the way you framed it. And so the next question I have for you as we get to, as you discuss the ANC, I wanted to know, how did you get involved with the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania or Azania?
Oh, lovely. It's a bit of a long one. But in hindsight, just to also stretch the point that we're saying, you know, insofar as how Africa is treated and how blacks have been treated, you know, it is also the matter of how it has been permissible to the world to treat black bodies as anyhow and however it wants, you know, which brings us again to the question that Jared Sexton had, you know, on the question of Black Lives Matter, you know, which is they matter to whom, you know. So it's also another question that I want us to ponder on, you know, as to whom do these Black Lives Matter to, you know,
Or who,
which also gives us then.
not to cut you off, but just to add to that, who would even say that? Because to me, like you said, if me and you were coming up with a campaign, I don't think we would necessarily call it Black Lives Matter, because I think that we are already at that point. We already understand that our lives matter. So to me, that's also that's something that was imposed, not necessarily something that, like you said, the people on the ground. It's not a campaign that came from the grassroots. So that's just my assertion. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, definitely. So just to briefly answer your question, Dakwan. So I come across the Pan-Africanist Congress, as I said to you that I've moved across the country. But at a later stage of my life, I would domicile in Joburg because this is where I would also do my high school and stuff. So I would then, I had a teacher in class, Mr. Vilakazi. He had a brother who was involved in the liberation struggle. He was also my history teacher, you know, was so very much invested in how we viewed the world. He was also interested in how we analyze and our understanding of the world. He was also interested in how we were orientated in so far as our political outlook was concerned. And I think majority of the things of who I am today, I owe a bit of that to him. So I would then learn about the Azanian People's Liberation Army, which was the military wing of the PAC. I then learned of this in high school. But however, then if people are familiar with, or if you came across any South African history textbook, you would understand that the history of Black consciousness is not even a paragraph. And even the history of the PAC is not even a paragraph in that, you know, if there is any paragraph to that, you would definitely find something along the lines of them being terrorists, you know, on all of those things. Because in a way, even how our education system is put up or how our education system is modeled, there's this epistemic violence that occurs and that takes place, you know, which we're also not aware of. You know, there's this cognitive violence that we are subjected to insofar as how we view ourselves, how we relate to the world as Black people, and how we also navigate the world insofar as our liberation is concerned. So when I came across the Azanian People's Liberation Army, I was, I think, 15, turning 16, 17 at that time. So this is when I come across this, but it was so small. And then because I became interested, I was so more concerned as to who are these people, you know, who are they, you know, and why so much are they vilified in the manner in which they are vilified, you know. Oh, then in my interaction or in my curiosity, then come across many veterans who were part and parcel of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. I would then, after my high school, come to university, which is where then I would come and join their student wing, which is the Pan-Africanist student movement of Azania. In short, it's called PASMA. So I joined the student movement of Azania. And this is where even politically, intellectually, and otherwise, one gets groomed and one gets trained. Because what happens with the student movement is that even before you can do anything, the constitution on its own is already prescribing to you that, look, these are the texts that you should be looking into, your Black consciousness text, your socialism, scientific socialism, Marxism, and so on and so forth, because the aim is so to assist you to sharpen your tools of analysis. And so for you to understand how the system functions and how the world is made up. So this is how then I get to join it, become part of the student movement at a later stage of our lives, because of how then the reception of the university was, and because of what we're already reading and understood. This is at the peak of roads must fall, then the fees must fall, again, we do this, we join it as a student movement, and gradually as one is in the student movement, because the student movement is a child of the mother body, so I get to be the member of the organization as well, and I grew in the organization till this age.
Mm. The only follow-up comment I have from that is it's amazing, again, as you just mentioned, that the youth in the student arms, they conscientize or politicize Black youth, and they're doing that work, which is, again, working directly, we could say, I guess, against the systems. And again, as you mentioned at the beginning, historically, as it's taught, the framing is that members of the PAC, like you said, are terrorists, or they're really pretty much marginalized, and you have a sentence or a paragraph that glosses over all the work that they do and what it stands for. So with that being said, actually, this is a perfect segue. The next question I have for you is, again, and you can please feel free to elucidate. I'm not going to try to go into, again, the history from 1959, but I wanted to discuss the role of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and now, again, the modern day South Africa, what these people call it, because they like to name things, and that's how they control our minds. Considering its founding in the 20th century and the actions of Mr. Sobukwe, who I actually have one of the books about him. I don't know if this is the best one, but this is
it's not.
Yeah, it's so many. What I'm reading, and it's I just feel like he's one of the ancestors that I'm deeply connected to, because when people think about, and I had the privilege of going to Cape Town. I wish I was able to speak with you, and then I knew you then. I went to Robben Island. When everybody, again, in this international world, they say Robben Island, they say Mandela, 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 and you go to Robben Island and you hear that Sobukwe was the only person that was isolated. Like, that to me is like, that in and of itself is a giveaway that this man's mind was so profound and so intergenerational and so out of this world and out of this galaxy that you would have to isolate him. Where, again, as somebody like Mandela, whatever happened, and then he goes and becomes president, poof, like that. But anyway, how do you think modern day citizens regard the PAC and its aims? And one could say that the PAC is needed now just as much as it was in 1959. So I just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Lovely stuff. Look, I think for me, I would really want to look into the history of it as well, because perhaps without us having tapped on its history, we would be doing an injustice to it, and equally to the people that would be doing this, because it is its history in essence that puts it to the position that it's in today. It's so far as it's being erased on the annals of history, insofar even as its leader, Robert Sobukwe's voice, being erased on the annals of history in South Africa. And of course, we draw it precisely from the historical formation of the party, and well as how it breaks away. Because you must also understand that South Africa on its own was a project, and is still a project. With that being a project, it would therefore mean that there are certain powers that would not want the resources, therefore, to be returned to its rightful owners and the people. Because insofar as the Pan-Africanist aims are concerned, which is socialism, Africanism, unity, the land, and this is basically what we mean when we raise our hand, because each finger speaks, But the most important one would be this, which precisely speaks to our land, and aim number one, which speaks to the unification of the African people, right? Because without, therefore, this first aim and the unification of African people, which means, therefore, that in the next 200 years, we're still going to find ourselves in this position outside of the Berlin Conference right now, right? And this would be because of the current system and coloniality, in essence. Because this is where the problem of modernity is, this is where even the problem of our government is, insofar as South Africa is concerned. But now to tap really into the relevancy of the PAC, because if you would recall its history and it finding itself in the position that it's in today. So post 1994, coming into South Africa and the CODESA, debates that were taking place, because there was CODESA 1 and CODESA 2. The first was the economic one, the other was the land question, which is where we dribbled as blacks. Everything was taken. But in hindsight, the Pan-Africanist Congress has always maintained the position, right? Which is one, that the suffering of Black people in South Africa was precisely because of their dispossession. It was also simply because of how they were put into the system and the displacement that Africans were facing. So with, therefore, this type of mentality, because you must understand that when South Africa was built with racial capital and the land being taken, therefore, when then the PAC is coming with this line of march or is coming with this agenda of taking the land, because you must recall that the agenda of the land is not a new agenda. It is a long agenda, because even the breakaway of the youth, in actual fact, of the African National Congress youth in 1949 from the ANC, was precisely because of this disagreement insofar as the land was concerned and insofar as the liberation of people in Africa are concerned, which is where even the issue or the question of African nationalism on its own comes into question, which is, of course, that also another argument that we need to have for another day, when concerning African nationalism and just outlook at everything thereof as far as it's concerned and its basic tenets, therefore, But again, it goes back to what I was saying with the PAC, because the problems of the PAC start really with the negotiations of 1994 and coming into the democratic dispensation, because equally with the PAC, it had to be broken, because as I read its history and understanding what happened, therefore, in those early years of the conversation on democracy, the breakaways, therefore, even were solely informed or were made deliberately so that the organization does not make it into South Africa. Because should the PAC make it into South Africa, it would mean that, therefore, these engagements are still going to be continuous engagement. And white people of South Africa were already tired of having a conversation insofar as them returning the land, insofar as them returning the resources right to the rightful owners. Because even right now, when the issue of the amendment of the constitution in South Africa was raised, it was majority white people in South Africa who came to the forefront to argue that Black South Africans were actually migrants in South Africa, and that their land belonged to the Khoisans, which on its own, again, as an ahistorical factor, that the political organizations that are in power are not fully doing the work that they are supposed to do because of them also being misinformed as to our history. Because this is where the problem of the national bourgeoisie with their consciousness, they are not really invested in the liberation of the people, but the national bourgeoisie are very much interested in creating another elite class, which that elite class is going to be created by them, because as the political figures or the liberation or veterans, they are entitled to this thing. They're entitled to leave the country. They're entitled to take it to wherever that they see, which is, there was not even a political imagination insofar as where do we take South Africa. because if there was a political imagination insofar as taking South Africa to the right logical conclusion, which would have been the state having total control of the means of production, the state having total control of the land, and the state having total control on each and everything, the animals that crawl the land, the animals that walk the land, the animals that are on the sea, you know, in the air and everything thereof. But still to this very same day, those things are not controlled by the state, but are still controlled by the white supremacist patriarchal entities in the country. And this is a well-known factor. It is not even a secret. So when you then come to the relevancy and the position of organizations such as the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, there are a lot of backlashes insofar as it is concerned, because as I said earlier, that even when you go to school, you know, there's this erasure of their role, there's this erasure of its existence thereof. And there's always this fear that is instilled upon children when the issue of the land question is brought into the table. Or the youth, therefore, because white people have always and are always going to be seen as the messiahs, you know, because there was never that direct confrontation we had with white people. Because had there been any of that, perhaps even the youth, they would understand what the aims of the organization are. Because insofar as the aims of the organizations are concerned, I would even bring the issue of xenophobia into the fore, which is on its own, we've had a long debate insofar as the semantics that are used, you know, because xeno is the fear of the foreigners, you know, and in the context of Africa, in the context of South Africa, we cannot then regard other blacks as foreigners. It would then mean those blacks are Africans in our context. But then because we have these contradictions and this mentality or that still needs to be worked on or decolonized, as Ngungi would proclaim and write, right? Because it is really permissible or has been allowed for the longest of time that there must be a deliberate political landness when it comes to young people of the country. And there's also been a deliberate divorce of young people from the politics of the country. This we can blame our history, we can equally also blame our current political landscape of South Africa, because it has really on its own discarded or has made young people lose interest in politics because of how things are functioning or how things are set up. And primarily young people are losing hope in our politics simply because they've seen that with politics in South Africa or in politics in the world, they are again used as sort of the social mobility instead of them being used, you know, as a torchbearer for a revolution in which we are still anticipating as young people. So on its own, therefore, it then makes it difficult even for young people to gel fully into the politics of South Africa. It makes it difficult for young people fully to even entertain the question of the land issue into South African context, because even if today, Daquan, you were to have a typical argument or typical engagement or conversation with a South African typical layman, insofar as the land question is concerned in South Africa, the first question that they would typically ask you is, what are Black people going to do with land? You know, it's those mediocre questions because it has been instilled upon their minds that Black people are incapable. Black people are unable, you know, and therefore it is permissible, therefore, for them to die and languish in poverty. It is also permissible for them to have nothing, you know. So when then you look into these things and how then the Pan-Africanist Congress is, you know, you will then find it difficult for young people to then relate to it because of these factors that are put to the fore, you know. Because as I was saying earlier, that even with the issue of xenophobia in South Africa, we still have an argument that this is not xenophobia, this is Afrophobia. Because our notion and our understanding of xenophobia and our understanding of the foreigner is the settler in South Africa, and the question of the settler in South Africa would then be the white person. And then when you go to then Afrophobia, it is the fear of other Africans, right? So even the argument and the engagement, therefore, it would become different because here are African brothers and sisters fighting, but can we have a discussion as to find out as to what is the genesis or what are the foundations of this fight? Because contradictions amongst Black people are resolvable and reconcilable compared to contradictions amongst white people and Black people, because they are long-standing and they are very much historical compared to us and Black people. Because also, if you look into the issue of Afrophobia, which is something that should not even be happening in South Africa because concerning our history, and also if the Marxists were correct in their notion of people being dehumanized by the capital, you would also understand that South Africa, while it was building its racist capital, it took a lot of labor of African brothers in Africa and other parts of the African continent, the West and the East of Africa. They took them to South Africa so that the racial capital of South Africa can then exist, and then it can be what it is. So when then other young or other African people see South Africa or perceive South Africa as this desired destination, it is not simply because of they want to come and take resources out of South Africa, but also it is because of this long historical standing, issue that has not been resolved. So it's quite a lot in so far as the Pan-Africanist Congress is concerned, and how therefore the youth in essence relate to it. Because I can tell you that even with us as young people in the Pan-Africanist Congress, we are still asked as to what are you doing in this part, there are many other political organizations you can join, and all of that rhetoric, because people have not yet grasped really what is the fundamental contradiction in South Africa. And the PAC being the only party, I believe, that would be able to really liberate the full of South Africa. I would also just, for the benefit of the session and your benefit, I'll definitely also give you the political economic framework of the organization, which was developed in the 1960s. You will definitely also see its relevancy into today's South African political landscape, which therefore would answer some of the questions that have been posed to us as to why are you young and what are you doing in this political organization, whereas there are other political organizations in South Africa. So I'll just take it from there now.
I have comments, but the first thing I have to do is thank you, because again, the way you just broke everything down, to me, that's a class in and of itself. That's something that people need not only to hear, but we need to have programs. Obviously, people like us believe in public education and stuff like that, where education shouldn't necessarily have to be paid for. And one of the reasons I created this platform is because I wanted to serve as a form of public education. But this is, again, something that everybody over, worlds over, planets over needs to hear. And it's so many, again, poignant points that, you just hit on the head. Two comments I'll say just before moving on, starting with the youth and, just the politics, because I have some other questions about them. As you said, this, what I call the factionalism, the way that they fragment us and they make us, support these little colors, different, again, organizations that are supposedly, again, doing things. It divides all of us up, and it's just another form, a contemporary form of divide and conquer. You also mentioned, xenophobia. It's the same thing, as you alluded to with the Conference of Berlin. We have Europeans who came up with these borders and these names, these colonizers who came up with names of African countries that replaced the names that we gave to them. And now we have this modern day status quo where, again, everybody, as somebody like Fanon would say, or again, Biko would say, we have these colonized minds where, and even people in South Africa, all over Azania would say, we still have colonized minds, the same way that they came up with those fictitious borders. We have these fictitious paradigms where, like you said, we still believe that we're inferior. So one would ask, what are Black people going to do with the land? And you've been saying it, and individuals like yourself have been saying it for at least the last 60 years. That, to me, is, again, that's just, it doesn't even make me mad. It's more so disheartening. And then the last point that I want to make, to me, again, the story of South Africa, it's a reason that South Africa was supposedly, the first country to get its independence, even though that was led by, the settlers. To me, the story of South Africa is the story of the African continent, because in my opinion, it's the most progressive nation state. But at the same time, like as you just said, the people are being chained, and it's so stagnant because there's this dialogue, and you can have the dialogue and you can have the discourse, which again that you've been doing, and advocating and creating these platforms. But again, the people, because the structures exist at the same time, and the structures, what I would say is colonialism never stopped. The settlers never stopped, even though we had the independence era, of the 60s and the early 70s or whatever. The settlers never left. They just transformed it and gave it a new word, and now it's called globalization. And because of the global political economy, again, these businesses, as you said, in South Africa and the international context, they do the very same thing. And it's worse. But like you said, that's for another day. Just to stay on task, I just wanted to get to a contemporary issue, going to the interview that you sent me with Newsroom Africa. You discussed the importance of holding the nation's leadership accountable, as South Africa's National Student Financial Aid Scheme, the NSFAS, allegedly paid up to 260 million rand, or 14 million in US context, to approximately 158,000 fake college students. So this, to me, again, like there's so many other forms of or examples of corruption. But to me, again, the fact that you have people making, when there's so many individuals like yourself who are pursuing their masters, there's so many individuals. We have the Fees Must Fall movement. There's individuals who are actually trying to make all ends meet and still pursue education. You have people laundering money or funneling money to themselves through fake accounts and fake students. I just wanted to know, one, or obviously, do you believe this money should be paid back to taxpayers? And what practical steps do you think can be taken to resolve this high level of, one could say, mismanagement or corruption? And I have my own thing about corruption. To me, again, I think that the white hand is always in that too. But I just wanted to know your thoughts.
Look, I'm glad that you mentioned the last sentiment, that there's always, a white hand that is involved. But in hindsight, insofar as the National Financial Aid Scheme is concerned, so let me start it here. So when the Fees Must Fall movement broke in South Africa, it was precisely because of fee increments within the universities of South Africa, and the fact that still a majority of Black South African students in the country cannot afford to come to a new university, even though there are financial aid scheme that has been put into place, which on its own, it is not a bursary, but it is a loan, right? So when these things were happening and students were calling out on those things, the very same minister, which is Blame Demand, was the minister at the time. We went and called for his removal at the time. He was removed for a certain period of time, and then the administration changed. He was put back again into his position as the Minister of Higher Education in South Africa. So with that happening, South Africa is broken into two, right? There's universities and there's technicons, right? Which is TVETs in short, in South Africa. So both these are mostly dependent or majority dependent upon the National Financial Aid Scheme. Perhaps I would like to make a statement and claim that it is probably 80% of the student populace in the country that relies upon the financial aid scheme.
Wow.
You must bear in mind that when all of those things are happening, they happen at the center of South Africa coming out of the Commission of Inquiry, the Zondo Commission, which it was set up to speak into corruption in South Africa, and inverted commas. But post that, there was nobody that was arrested, and there was nobody that was held accountable insofar as these atrocities are concerned.
Wow.
To now bring the point home, or bring it closer to home. So a few days ago, it so happens that was on the early week of January, if the 5th, if not the 7th, but somewhere there, I came across an article, and this article was by Outer. It is NGO that is very much vested on whistleblowing, right? It's a white establishment, but isn't concerned with whistleblowing where corruption is concerned, but it's a white establishment. So what happens then, there was a whole range of recordings that were taking place between the chairperson of the financial aid scheme, the Minister of Education in South Africa. So the Minister of Education in South Africa is also associated to the South African Communist Party, which is also another story for another day, because we don't have communists in this country. They are just quacks. That's what they are. There are no communists in South Africa. People must just know that. There is no communist party, and we don't have any communists in South Africa. We just have quacks. It's part of this Communist Party, which is also a party that they use to launder money from this financial aid scheme for comrades, in essence. So when this comes out and these recordings are played out in the public, first thing that comes to mind to me is, in actual fact, we need to have a response to this, because it is not the first time. And bear in mind, Daquan, when I said we must make a statement, I was also like, I'm trying to avoid us being rhetorical, because these things, it's not the first time that they're happening. We've been saying the same thing over and over and over again. And so far as accountability is concerned in South Africa, insofar as education is concerned in South Africa. Because believe you me, we still have a whole wide range of population that is illiterate post the democratic dispensation, right? But equally, our primary concern is therefore those that have went through the education system of South Africa and have done all that is required of them to do, and they've excelled and passed. The only thing that they must do is to come to university. And they need the scheme, Daquan, to come to university, because without the National Financial Aid Scheme, believe you me, they would not able to come, because a large majority of South African kids who are currently in high school and so on, they rely on our social security in South Africa. We call it the South African Social Services Agents, which is SASSA in short. So majority of the children then in South Africa who are below an income of 300 plus something rands, they are eligible for that, which means therefore that if you've got that, it would also mean that you would be eligible for NSFAS at university. But over the past years, even post the Christmas fall, what we have seen happening is, one, there's been serious maladministration of funds insofar as NSFAS is concerned. So even us as a student movement as PASMA, there was a time when one of ours was given 14 million and transacted into her account. The whole story is still going to court to this day, and this is where even the first thing, or the first alarm that was supposed to alarm the public, was supposed to come into, but instead the person that was blamed here was the student, and not really investigating the system as to how did it happen that somebody, instead of sending 1,400, sends 14 million. So it comes to that. And when these things are happening with the financial aid scheme, you come to university beginning of the year. I speak to you right now. If you're to come to universities of South Africa, majority of the students next week, they're supposed to register to start university, but they won't be able to register simply because NSFAS is not going to pay for their registration fees at university. What does that mean, Daquan? It means that for the larger population of Black people that have had children who started schooling in public school up until through universities, are going to find themselves out of university and are going to find themselves with small jobs that are very much exploitative to them. I'm equally not saying that by them coming to university, it would mean that they are going to get jobs. But by coming to university, at least it allows one to further their studies as it has been promised and as a basic right to anyone who exists within this country, and anyone who's guided by the Constitution of South Africa that was developed in 1997 and adopted there. Because some of those things are things that are said to be basic rights, but in essence, you find that they are not basic as they proclaimed to be. So when we did this and when we are calling out for accountability, even now the minister has again responded to say that he's refuting these claims, he's refusing that in actual fact he's even implicated in those things, but his voice is there, in those recordings and so on. So insofar as accountability is concerned in South Africa, we have a serious problem with accountability in this country. I would even reference to you to the issue of women in South Africa and rape cases on its own, and the issue of femicide in South Africa. I just want to show you how there's no sense of accountability in whatsoever. When you call for these things, or when we call for these things of accountability, at times it was with the hope that perhaps it is going to make sense to its comrades, because equally these are people, these are our comrades in hindsight. These are Black people, even though they are non-Black at this point in time, but they're Blacks who can still be convinced to say that, listen, comrades, what you are then are doing is not on, because this is the reality that we're faced with as South Africans. So there's serious moral decay in South Africa. There is no ethics whatsoever, there is no ethical considerations. And even to chant for accountability at times, it is just merely out of hope, of hope that these things are going to not fall on deaf ears, but will fall to people that have conscience enough to understand, therefore, that a large population of South Africa, more especially young Black children, are dependent on them. And I like putting it out there and reiterate the fact that it's Blacks, because in the context of South Africa, the majority of the people are Black people. And the majority of the people that are forced into public schooling are Black children. The majority of the people that are forced into coming to universities without any form of funding or without parents that have a trust fund for them are Black children. So when we make these things and make these claims, it is not because we want just a political currency, but it is also because of the status quo and what the political landscape dictates at this time. Because even whether we like it or not, South Africa is slowly but surely going back to the hands of the minority. And there's a white settler colonialist in this country that we are not aware that we're bringing them behind the door, And this is what white people do in South Africa, because as I had earlier mentioned, that OUTA is a white NGO. And this is not to say that there are no white people who can be allies to our discourse. But in hindsight, we must also be wary of how white people, in essence, also navigate spaces where Black people are concerned and their perspective insofar as Black people are concerned. And when it comes to corruption, because in South Africa, there's this stigma that corruption is only a Black thing or a Black politician thing, whereas there are white companies in South Africa that are busy doing white-collar crimes that have not been held accountable. I'm talking about just 4 months ago, Daquan, we had a rand that was manipulated. No bank has been held accountable for that. No white accountant has been arrested, even though they've come out and accepted that in actual fact they are responsible for this thing, but they've not been arrested because, white people can do as they please. White people can't be corrupt, guys. Come on, corruption is a Black thing, So it's always that when it comes to accountability, because also when you want this accountability in most instances, there's that vertical and that horizontal approach, that you'd want these people to look into. But in hindsight, there's no interest, of accounting whatsoever. And I'm afraid this is a trajectory that we are faced with as South African. And of course, it is the responsibility of us as young people, because I do think that somewhere, somehow, the political landscape has really changed, and it allows us for, as young people, in actual fact, to partake in it and have a say in it, which is why I would really call for young people, even those that would be watching this and are in the diaspora or are not in South Africa, to really be concerned in so far how things are taking place at home. Because the situation that we're going to find ourselves in the next few years is really a saddening one. Because if you sit down and also just the politics of the country, because also we are going to the national elections of 2024 next year, and the projections are that we are going to have the longest ballot paper ever in history. You know what I mean? That would mean that probably the ANC is going to lose a certain fraction of its power, a certain percentage, which gives then more room for the oppositions in South Africa, the likes of the DA, which is a white party, and also even other political black organizations that we think therefore are black, your Action essays than the others. Those are white political organizations, but they are led by black people, So we really need young people in South Africa to really partake and be concerned insofar as politics are concerned and the status quo of their country, because nothing frustrates me as the status quo of South Africa, because people might think that we are just we want to be oppositions for the sake of being that, but we exist, we live here, and we feel the brand on a daily basis, We know what it is like to exist in a white world with a black person, and it's just that, man. I'm done for now.
Again, once again, thank you for your eloquent and poignant answer, because you're hitting everything on the head. Because just me being cognizant of time, I want to do a time check. Are you good on time? Because I don't know.
I'm good.
Okay, because I wanted to get to the as many questions as I can, but I didn't want to keep you. So okay, this again, everything you said to me, Jen, that it being a contemporary issue, it being something that affects the youth, that to me is that is something that makes me mad. If I could speak personally. And again, as the thinkers that we are, I want to challenge us to not just think of, it's not my child, so it doesn't affect me. And then for people who may be in other African states, for people who may be in North Africa and West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, or again in America or Europe, anybody in the diaspora that's watching this, we have to be mindful, because again, I think inherent in what you said is, if it's happening there, somebody's going to try to implement it here too. So don't think that just because we don't have the same organization, or because the currency exchange is more, so the American dollar is worth more, or whatever foolishness that you think about the euro, the currency stuff aside, we all have a global political economy. So this is all interconnected. And especially now, because our economy is transforming into a digital economy as we're having this interview virtually, again, I would like to challenge everybody's thinking to understand a lot of the things that you pointed out here that happen in South Africa or Azania. The same things are happening in America in their own way. Me, again, being a product of two historically Black colleges and universities. My first alma mater is Morgan State University, which is where I matriculated in Baltimore and got my bachelor's in sociology. And now I'm doing my doctorate at Howard University, which is considered the premier and foremost HBCU in America in terms of prestige. There's still classism and elitism amongst the HBCUs. So it's not parity. There's no parity, going back to what you just mentioned. So again, we all have to challenge the way that we think. And that's just the school level. And then for those people who don't necessarily go to school, again, these issues are more or less the same. But again, because of the celebrities and because of the gossip and because of the YouTubes, even though we're using this now, people, the mainstream media promotes the distraction. The mainstream media promotes the nonsense. They promote things that are really irrelevant to us, and they make us digest that to the point where we don't pay attention to these issues. And not only do we not pay attention to these issues, when we have, again, people like yourself or like the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, people give these cognitive dissonance responses of, oh, what are we going to do if we get the land, or Black people are inferior, or we deserve this, because again, as you said, tongue in cheek, but this is also really, we believe that certain people can do no wrong. And, again, you also mentioned the banks, again, doing the corruption issue a couple of weeks ago. Again, these things are happening in their own way all across Africa, all across Europe, all across America, and in the global South and Latin America. But again, everybody's turning a blind eye, or we look at it as, if you're an activist, you have to be a certain way, or of a certain, doing a certain thing, or they just have us, disbelieving in ourselves to the point where we just don't believe in social movements as much as we should. So that's my little, tangent. But the main thing I wanted to get to before, two things. I want to pivot to, I guess we could say a positive outlook, because I want, despite all of this stuff, I want, we're still here. We exist. We're spiritual people. This is, again, the benefit and beauty of the diaspora. This global economy in this world depends on the Black woman, the Black child, and every social movement was led and catalyzed by the Black woman and the Black child. And as we move forward, again, all of these distractions exist because they're just continuing to try to tear up and tear apart the Black family or the Black community or the Black woman and the Black child. So I say that again in a positive outlook. Before I get to my questions about the youth, I wanted to know, most importantly, how can South Africans, and equally, how can members of the international community support the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania?
Awesome stuff. I think I'm just going to be brief with this one insofar as the international community is concerned, because even previously, the organization has previously, as far as I can recall, the 1950s, the 1970s, it has always had and garnered international support in London, Netherlands, and all of these other parts of the world, the US as well, who did garner a lot of international support. But I think because of how the world has changed and how things have changed, and insofar as our popularity is concerned as the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and how things have played out over the years, that on its own had distanced a lot of people that we had a support from. But insofar as the international community is concerned, for me, what I would like to say is the fact that, one, if anyone wants to understand, the basic tenets of what the Pan-Africanist Congress stands for, I'm here, I'm available, I'm always willing to guide at any time of the day. And number two, what I also like to state is the fact that the international community, insofar as the Pan-Africanist Congress is concerned, one of the things that we would definitely need, it is for us to be able to reach our international community outside, because this is one of the things that have been difficult to do, because we also have some other people who come to the country who claim to be Pan-Africanists and Prince of Pan-Africanisms, but when you sit and listen to them, it's just a lot of anti-blackness, that in whatever that they do is just anti-black. So for me, it is also just a matter of us also coming to the international community insofar as reclaiming our position in the world and reclaiming our position in the South African landscape, because the organization over the years really it had suffered immensely. It has suffered from internal things that are happening, but even though that we have now been able to move and progress beautifully over those things that have happened over the years. But for me, really, because also if I were to speak in issues of how they can assist us insofar as mobilizing other Africans in the diaspora and otherwise, because we must bear in mind also our conceptions and our understanding of our Africanness, are totally different, which is to some extent we still definitely need to have a proper engagement, because as I was listening some other time, I can't recall who I was listening to, but I'll definitely get back to you on this one, because there was an argument I was listening to insofar as the African American community is concerned. There are those that do not want to be referred to as the African Americans, but as the American Americans, which is for me on its own, it's valid, it makes sense. So there are still those things that we still need to iron out and discuss as the African people, because also going and tapping into the issue of spirituality and so on, we are also still divided concerning those things, and equally it's because also we are still also ourselves proper British colonial subjects. Others still Christians, others believe in African spirituality or what they deem that as, So there is still this fragmentation amongst us as the African people. But what I have been able to see and what I really appreciate mostly even with the international community is that even with little communities that they create amongst themselves, the Pan-African communities that they would create, that on its own is enough for me. But then again, it would then speak of us as to how then do we connect our lives, why as the diaspora and as South Africans, with the diaspora, and also how do we then make it a point that we also mobilize other Africans within the African continent, because immediately if we can be able to just achieve our first aim, which is the unification of African people, in the diaspora in Africa and everywhere and where they occupy currently. If that aim can then be achieved, it would make it easy for Pan-Africanists in the motherland to then be able to fully say that this is our expectation insofar as the international community is concerned, because we would be organized, and we've seen with the works of Marcus Garvey and the rest, because his work still stands out the most insofar as the vision and the idea was concerned, of Africans, which is also on its own. We have different takes on that on its own, but if really we were to go back to the source, we would then be able to say what really is our expectation. But insofar as the international community, for me, is I wanted them to raise the name of the Pan-African Congress as high as possible, and also to know that the Pan-Africanist Congress is still very much existent. It's still very much values Black people wherever and however they are. It is very much still a home to all Africans, in the continent and outside of the continent. Understanding that those that are even outside of the continent, they are not there because they wanted to be there, but it's because of the coloniality of migration that puts them in the position that they are in. So if we can just be able as Blacks to have that conversation and be able to connect everything, if the likes of Padmo and the likes of Du Bois and the rest were able to create not only an intellectual bar, but also were able to, with their work, to create activists that were not only intellectual, but also activists that were informed and activists that were conscious enough and understood not only the literature, but also insofar as how they navigated their Blackness and how they imagined the world, So for me, my interest really is in the consciousness, therefore, of Black people in their worlds, Black people in Palestine, Black people everywhere, because the issue with Black people is the fact that wherever they go and wherever they are always reminded of their Blackness.
Yep.
Be it either they are wearing a hijab, be it either they are wearing Christian clothes, whatever that they do, wherever that you go, as long as you are Black in the world, you are constantly going to be reminded of your Blackness, your nothingness, and just your being in its entirety, that you don't belong, So if really Black people were to reach that consciousness and that level of madness, because we have not reached the madness that I want us to reach, so that really we can put into practice that if we can reach that level of madness, really we can put that into practice, that the revolution is not going to be televised, because we would really be united as Africans in whatever little corner that we are. So for me, that is my take insofar as the international community is concerned. Because also I don't want to put a burden in the international community, because also the international community also has its own issues. But if we were to connect live wires to know that if the issues concerning Blacks in the diaspora and the issues concerning Blacks in South Africa, we come together, we connect, and we speak on these issues and advocate for one another, because that is my imagination of what solidarity is and my imagination of what African unity would look like.
No, again, one, well said, and two, again, I completely agree. I think just really quickly, if I could say it very shortly, again, all of these issues are transnational, and if we're being honest with ourselves, again, we have a global economy. So again, one issue, as I guess Dr. Martin Luther King said, and others, if injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, then again, we should recognize that what's happening in South Africa is happening here, what's happening here is happening in Europe, happening here is happening in Senegal, Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, Brazil. It's all over. Like you said, Palestine is literally all over. And secondly, again, in the notion of spirituality, we were born with spirits, and we were given different religions. We could talk about, like you said, that another day as to the why or the how, but everybody's an individual and everybody's a leader and everybody's unique. So again, I don't think, not saying you said this is just me speaking to those who, like I said, there's so much fragmentation. You have people who believe in this American context, we have like what we consider the left or the progressives. And to me, I like to say like the left is the middle to me, because I'm so quote unquote, I guess, off the scale as far as being comprehensive or radical. Everybody's dreams are approved because they exist. So again, like you just said, what you envision as far as your imagination, we all can, be Africanist. We all can be progressive. We all can do different things in different ways. It doesn't mean that there has to be one notion or one idea or one campaign or one organization that, we have to all join to necessarily do the same thing, as you mentioned, in the spirit of solidarity. And I think that maybe I'm just talking about males. This is probably just a male problem because I haven't necessarily seen this as much as with women. Males, we allow our egos and our conception of history and who we studied from and who we studied under or what we think we should do, to the point where, again, we just like, we're trying to use the same tool, or we're trying to use the soul tool, or again, we have billions of people in the world, billions of members of the diaspora. And again, we chastise each other, and we don't necessarily really genuinely support each other as humans or spirits first. And it's more so, oh, did this person meet the quota? Did this person come to the rally? Did this person go do the community service? Did this person do this? And it's like we just leave each other out to dry instead of actually supporting who we are as spirits first. And that's something that I deeply believe in. I just wanted to say that. So again, as we pivot, just because again, I don't want us to freeze, or I don't want anything to happen as far as the technology. I have a couple of concluding questions. The first thing I wanted to say is, again, thank you again. I wanted to know, I'm gonna drop my political party questions because I think we discussed those, and we could connect another time where we could discuss that more. But in terms of the youth, this is two loaded questions. And please follow me, I can restate them. The first one is just simply, I wanted to know if you could share your thoughts about the importance of youth, South African youth, their importance to the sectors of society, in South Africa or Azania. But more importantly, this goes again to the positive outlook. The way I wrote it. So although many people like to overstate the statistics and the stories that tell of crime or high poverty or xenophobia and underdevelopment and government mismanagement, when I think of Azania, as far as me, being there again just 3 times, for about, 3 weeks, maybe up to a month, I think about what I've seen is the youth, the music, their spirit, the fashion, education, formal or informal. Like I believe we could all learn from each other. Everybody knows something that somebody else doesn't. So it doesn't matter if you went and learned a book, or if you went to a Western school, or if you could speak English. No one person knows everything. But yeah, I think of their ambition and their resilience and the genius level innovation. So the second part of the question is, as one who's, a Zenian, and one who has experienced life, in the nation and in the state, and who works with others, I just wanted to know if you could speak about what would you like the world to know about the youth of South Africa?
Oh man, look, just to firstly tap into the first question, which is precisely on the role of the youth insofar as the landscape is concerned. Look, man, because concerning blackness, there are so many questions, but especially the youth, because it's saddening in the sense that, one, you would ask the question really, what does it mean to be a youth in South Africa, and more especially as a Black person? Because, with capitalism and how we exist in capitalism, we are born in certain spaces, and we are then forced to cut our umbilical cord with those spaces so that we can then become subjects into the belly of the beast, or we can become subject of colonialism.
Well said.
And what then happens with that, you find that it instills a certain type of mentality, because already by creating a system that has this interim wage, which sees it as a relief for people. Now, when you are then going to politicize and speak to the youth about the politics in such a setup, there are questions of what am I going to lose? What will happen tomorrow? I am doing this for my family. I am, there are all of those factors that are put into place, and more especially if you're trying to politicize and conscientize the youth. But equally, we cannot even blame the youth for its political blindness. As I said earlier, that there is this deliberate act of wanting to depoliticize the youth of South Africa and to only portray them into the international community as only these people who are creatives, one, and creatives in the liberal sense, two, as creatives, therefore, who can be used insofar as their craft is concerned, their art is concerned within the international community. Which that, when it comes to the youth on its own, because we have different assertions as to what really does it mean to be successful as a youth in South Africa, or even as a youth in the world, or wherever, man, Dalton.
Mm-hmm.
So you find that, and with those things that are happening, and the serious depoliticization thereof, it's where it mostly takes place, which makes it difficult for me and you or any other political activist to really convince these people insofar as the revolutionary theory is concerned, or is to conscientize them, which would then beg to answer the question of really what then is their role, and I think Fanon also has long answered this, insofar as our role as young people, right, which is out of relative obscurity, we must be able to find our own mission, right? And our mission, as you would deem, would be the mission to liberate Azania. It would be the mission to liberate Africa, and for all Black bodies in the world, to regain their position in the zone of humanity. Because as Afropress would put it, Black people are dead. We are socially dead beings, and we cannot negate that, and how do we then again reclaim our position if we're socially dead beings as humans into society? And also again, which would mean, what role do we really play as the youth if then again we are saying that these people are a socially dead youth and they're socially dead beings, and Blacks are really socially dead. So it is really difficult insofar as South Africa is concerned, because also how politics have been played out in front of young people in the country, insofar as them being seen as this ladder for social mobility again, because for young people in South Africa to get into politics, for them it would mean that I'm going to get to parliament, I'm going to have a salary and all of those things, which then divorces them from the whole broader perspective and the whole aims really of you having gone there so as to represent the people. And equally, you also at the same time, you can't blame such, because also in the spaces in which they operate in, they also get suffocated.
Mm.
But the role of the youth in South Africa is very complex and in the world, because really, for me, it's the matter of the youth needs to be organized, because it helps us not to also question its role without it having been organized. Because once then we are organized, we can then be able to say that this is then what our role is in society and where we want to see our society going insofar as the world is concerned. Because if we are of the view that we as the youth are the people, therefore, that must take South Africa or Africa to its logical conclusion, we must then be able to also respond to the question and the positionality of the youth in South Africa to say, are we capable enough, to go and stand on the trench lines to be able to stand up to whiteness? Are we able enough, insofar as our consciousness is concerned, to really advocate for these issues, right? Because the reason that you find young people even are not as active as they should be in political parties of South Africa, or just politics on its own, is also precisely informed by this disinterest that I'm speaking of, that has been done by the politics of this country, because immediately when you instill a certain of fear of some sort to people, or you do certain things that are going to make people question as to, is this even worth it? Because in South Africa, the youth today is a youth that grew after the Marikana massacre of 2012, where miners were gunned down.
Mm.
And if you look into the age group of those young men that were shot in Marikana, majority were not even over 40. They were youth of South Africa. They were young people. You know, you have understood Dana was killed while protesting for what, you know, and these are things that we are able to draw from and conclude from as young people, because they happen in right in the midst of our eyes. Because when the guns went down in Marikana and people were killed, something happened in our consciousness as young people to say that if we are going to stand and protest against the state and against the capital, it means therefore that the state will use its state apparatus against us and kill us, because this is what the state does, and purposefully so, to make it a point that the youth has no voice, and there's blackness insofar as the voice of the youth is concerned. Because if the youth, again, as I was saying earlier, were to be organized, would even be able to answer these questions that are currently happening insofar as political instability. We would not have issues where in Johannesburg we change mayors as nobody's business because of misadministration, you know, because of internal political dynamics that are taking place. Would you also find that there are negation of negation, because at the center of that, it is the ideological disconnect, or the different ideological orientations, you know, because they of this unprincipled type of marriage that South Africa has, you know, with the system. It's very much unprincipled, because even though there's blacks who are working and are representative of the system, but in hindsight, the system is not controlled by them, and so far as its means are concerned, and so far as the state apparatus are concerned, because everything is still very much private and not owned by the state. So when those things are happening in the midst of a youth that has been politically depoliticized deliberately, and on a youth that suffers such a psychological trauma, because there's also one thing that we negate insofar as blacks are concerned, which is our psyche and our trauma, and this generational trauma that we always find ourselves in, you know, and this generational trauma, which is informed by our encounter with the state, you know, each time we have a confrontation with the state, you know, there's always a response, and the response leads to a loss of life. If there's a response or there's a retaliation against the state, a loss of life is going to take place, you know. If there is a retaliation against the state of certain things, or there is a retaliation against anything, you know, insofar as South Africa is concerned, we know that young people are going to die. So there's also that trauma that folks in South Africa, or young people in South Africa, are suffering from, because of what they've been able to witness insofar as this democratic dispensation is concerned. And also how the youth on its own was able to also witness in 2015, 2016, 2017, how young people, although they were at university, but were arrested, you know, and served time in jail. So there are those things that the system does to make it a point that there is this mental suppression, which also informs the physical, therefore, insofar as you partaking or you expressing yourself and you standing up in the system. So because of the social death then that I'm speaking of, and also because the youth of South Africa is a victim, therefore, of that social death, because of the zone of non-humanity that we have been put into, you know, it then becomes a normalcy for us to exist in such things. It becomes a normalcy for us to die in the township, because South African townships are some of the most violent, and it's young people that are dying, you know. So you ask yourself really as to what really does it mean to be a youth in South Africa? And so far as those issues are concerned, what really does it mean to be a young person in South Africa and be able to stand up against a system that, you know, on its own is not going to be friendly to you when it responds, but it's going to make it a point that it takes your life. You know, what does it mean for you to be a youth in South Africa, but from a very young age, as far as you can recall, you've been exploited by the system insofar as working, because there's this burden that you have on its own. This burden is supposed not to be your burden, but the burden of the state, because most people do not understand what the role of the state is insofar as its people are concerned,
Right.
because when we're saying that the state must take total control of its people, we mean precisely that the state must be reliable for the people. Because if the state is reliable for the people, it would mean that there was a revolution that took place, and the state right now has control of the means of production. But people do not understand that, because people think therefore that when you're speaking of the state and you're saying that the state must then be responsible for its people, you are saying that the people must then be dependent on the state, which is what mostly the dependency theory says, which is, it's not that, it's misinformed, because people do not understand how power functions, people do not understand governmentality, because even Foucault teaches us on this thing, of how state is, and how state functions and how power is. So there are still those very much issues, Taquan, that we as the youth of South Africa are still very much suffering from. And majority of the people would assume, therefore, that we are this jolly youth, which is more concentrated on Amapiano and other stuff. But in hindsight, we are a youth that is very much traumatized, a youth that is still trying very much to navigate South Africa, and a youth that is still very much trying to understand South Africa, both as a liberated country and both as a country that still needs to be liberated, because there are those different views insofar as the youth is concerned.
Once again, I keep saying this. Thank you for, again, your insightful answer. And then also, once again, just me speaking from an American context, but what I know again about the world, I think what you described, you were focusing on South Africa, I know for sure, but you just described the world. And I think you just described the world for Black youth. And I think because of our trauma, me speaking about this from an American context, the natural inclination, the natural reaction, Azania, is for us to disassociate with our Blackness. And that natural inclination is to, what can I do? Right, yeah, what can I do? What school can I go to? What job can I get? What country can I go to? I'm gonna move from America. I'm gonna relocate to Europe. I'm gonna learn French. I'm going to France. I'm gonna learn Spanish. I'm going to South America. We do whatever we can to, as they say, now it's clout chasing, but we do whatever we can to disassociate with Blackness or to affiliate ourselves with power. And what we do in power basically means, as we know in this racialized world, it means whiteness. So we try to get in close proximity to whiteness. And some people choose to marry, people who identify themselves as white. Others, again, choose to, dress a certain way or speak a certain way to just say, I'm not like those Blacks. I'm not like those Africans. And that is pretty much a survival tactic and survival instinct out of fear, because we pretty much, in my opinion, for whatever reason, we don't believe in the love that we can have for each other, to the point where we believe somebody will listen to you and believe that you could lead us out, or listen to me and believe that, not that we're saying we're the only ones, but again, we just have a disbelief. And again, that, as you mentioned, is because of the cycle, the systematic, the trauma, which is reinforced. Everything, if as you look at the four corners of your screen, to me, religion, politics, media, and education, they reinforce that trauma. So whether you're going to church, especially another day, but what is the role of Christianity? What is the role of Christianity in Africa? What is the role of the Catholic Church? What is the role of Christianity in America? As you mentioned, again, politics get us to, they incentivize us via salaries, via affiliation, to where we feel like, again, we have to forget about our past or forget about our upbringing. Education, as we know, is the dumbing down or the whitewashing, or the cleansing and purifying of our brains, to where we're being indoctrinated into a system of this world. And again, the media, we know what the media does. So again, that's, like I said, I don't want to keep you too long, because we're definitely going to reconnect. Again, I wanted to thank you again for everything that you do, everything that you are, the inner spirit and the love that you have, and the passion that you have, and your commitment from from your politicization and conscientization to, again, where you're going. And again, we're still young. So I hope, that we can see, have the longevity that others have had, and continue to learn from our elders. The last question I want to ask is, not to try to limit you. If you want to be brief, you can. If you don't want to be brief, you don't have to, because I think you addressed this. Being that this year, and it's for both of our countries, and again, I think, we can answer this the same way. Being that this year is an election year, again, we've seen this cycle happen over and over again. They find new ways to distract us and stuff like that. What do you expect to happen during these elections? And do you think democracy, I think you may have answered this already, but do you think democracy has been successful in Azania?
Look, my understanding of democracy, as I said, that I am from the Azania School of Thought, and democracy therefore dictates that the rule of the majority supersedes the rule of the minority. And in the context of South Africa, then we already know who the minority is and who the majority is. So with that being said, as I alluded to earlier, that insofar as the elections are concerned this year, the projections are saying that we're going to have one of the longest ballot papers, and for me, Daquan, really believe in me, my only interest right now insofar as the political landscape and even elections are concerned, it is really for the Pan-Africanist Congress, and for me, because over the past years, as I said earlier, in the instability that we have had, we have not had majority of seats in parliament. My wish is for us to then be able to at least get another seat into parliament. And this, of course, I say precisely because I still believe that with the Pan-Africanist Congress, there are a lot of things that could be achieved in South Africa, insofar as South African people are concerned. I also believe that with the Pan-Africanist Congress, it would be a matter of it availing itself to its people, and its people making it a point that people also do partake in so far as the parliamentary processes are concerned, because one of the issues that I've been able to pick up over the years in so far as South African democracy is concerned is that over the years in South Africa, what would normally happen is that there would be a bill that is proposed, like for instance, the amendment of Section 25 of South Africa, which is the land part of the Constitution. So there are always bills that are put out, but you'd find that because of the illiteracy that South Africa has, and also because of inaccessibility insofar as the documents are concerned, so that people as well at grassroots level do partake and have a say. Because I am very much invested in people at grassroots level, because for the longest of time, Blacks who do not occupy certain positions or typical peasants have always been put as these people who have no imagination or cannot even think for themselves. But if then we were to really go to the people at grassroots level, you would really be surprised, and you would really find that majority of the things that we seek answers to, we would get them from the people at grassroots level. So my primary interest right now, in so far as those elections are concerned, really it goes back to my organization, and it's gaining another seat in parliament, because really, if people do not partake in this white paper document and these bills of rights, even though it might be liberal on its own, but we are existing within a liberal society, and we must exhaust on its means that have been put in front of us, as a way to an end, or a means to an end, because this is what liberalism likes to do, to think that when they put these bills into play, therefore they are means to an end, whereas they are not, in essence. So really, and what I really want to see, because I think insofar as global politics are concerned, because South Africa really has this tendency when it's national elections, or there's this tendency when we are going to elections, of really assuming that white capital really has no say in so far as elections are concerned, or white capital does not have its own political organization that represents it. even though it might be blacks, who are leading those political organizations. But at the center of those, it's majority white people who are, funding these people for their campaigns and so on and so forth. So I really wish to see a different outlook and also different results. Because I do know for a fact that the current leading political organization is going to lose certain seats in parliament, which again is going to give room for the Democratic Alliance or the Economic Freedom Fighters to come into as the official opposition, which again, this thing when they happen, when there really is no party that leads South Africa. Because what happened right now in South Africa with all of these parties that were winning in fragments and sections, there was a coalition, when governments come or political parties come into coalition. They have this unprincipled type of a polygamous marriage. But you know that in this polygamous marriage of yours, there's only one person that you love, which is the white capital monopole. So there's that. And with these unprincipled marriages, therefore, they also have a ripple effect into the South African political landscape insofar as service delivery is concerned, and all of those nitty-gritties. But in hindsight, man, I'm not going to dwell much. Really, that is my wish was for the Pan-Africanist organization to really have another seat in parliament and for it to really be centered and advocate for the issues of Black people, as it was really funded for that. Because without the Pan-Africanist Congress into the South African history or in Azanian history, the land question would not have been brought into the table, except it would have only ended in the 1800s when our kings were fighting face to face with settler colonialism. But the Pan-Africanist Congress has been able to make it a point that the issue of the land or the land question remains so relevant in the South African discourse. Because even parties that come after that are speaking about the land question, you won't believe it when I tell you that they come to the Pan-Africanist Congress to consult, because they know that there is no other organization that really advocates for this issue of the liberation of blacks in South Africa and the continent, other than the PAC. So my wish are really that it grows, all grows. We find more faces and people come out in numbers insofar as we are concerned. But I still believe that we also still have a lot of work that we need to do insofar as our young people are concerned, because this is also where the lack is of young people that are not really as active. We find that majority it's older people, and also that I cannot blame them because there's not really been that intergenerational engagement that take place in certain instances where we'd be able to capture and take these people in. But insofar as the elections are concerned, that is just my take. But I equally do also know that if the Africanist National Congress in South Africa, the ANC, loses its power, the likelihood of that white people are going to come into power, the DA is going to come into power. There's also other congresses and also other political parties that are growing, which are so anti-Black. There are also other, it's just a lot of things that are happening in South Africa, which needs to be resolved. But insofar as we are concerned, that is just my wish, Daquan. Even though I'm very much hopeless, I don't believe in the electoral system, because I definitely do know how it works and how it functions, and how over the years it has not benefited us as the majority of people. Because if democracy really is for us as the majority, it should favor us, the majority, So there's really still a lot of work that needs to be done. And there really still needs a lot of consciousness that must be done on Black people, because without Black people being conscientized and without Black people being liberated mentally, we are still going to have these engagements that, when the likelihood of our grandchildren having these engagements are 99.9%. So a lot of work.
Again, like I said, poignantly and eloquently said, I also don't believe in these systems, electoral politics. I guess the irony, or coincidentally, because I guess irony is something that you don't want, but it is. As we know, all of these systems, again, in the US, across Africa, Azania, and South Africa, these are imposed beliefs and imposed theories and imposed political, we could say, apparatuses that are extensions of colonialism, and they were designed by Europeans. And it's not to say that they're automatically negative because they were designed by Europeans, but they were designed by Europeans who were disingenuous and then who have, Africans or South Africans or Black peoples, the Black diasporas, best interests at heart. So if we're acknowledging that, then again, like you just said, the plethora, the 20 plus, 30 plus political parties that exist in South Africa, from what is it? Democratic Alliance, Action South Africa, Economic Freedom Fighters. Obviously, you being a member and part of the Pan-Africanist Congress, historically in CAFA, the African Independent Congress, Al Jama'a, like all of these things, again, like you just said, it's all factionalism and it's fighting over a system and crumbs that is still controlled by the same people who created the problem in the first place. And again, to your other point, what I would think, again, like you just said, the way that they fool us with the word democracy, which can also be interpreted to democracy. These Greco-Roman and Westphalian state, again, derivations. To me, I can make several arguments to where, again, whatever, no matter what party leads or wins, if they're the people in power, they should be also responsible for listening to the quote unquote small people, because again, for all these religious nuts and Christians, if the last shall be first, like it says that. So there's several arguments. I can make religious arguments, I can make philosophical arguments, I can make political arguments, I can make economic arguments, I can make social arguments, to where it's all fool's gold and it's all us chasing our tails to argue and bicker over something, while the same people that have historically marginalized us and oppressed us and subjugated us get away with the same things in a different form in a different country under a different name. And then again, what they just do is give us a good football game or a good celebrity and a good music, and they prop it up, and then we forget, and then we go back to trying to associate with power. Right. So again, like I said, we will speak again. I really, like I said, I'm not going to stop thanking you. We're going to continue to talk continue this conversation offline. But there's a lot. Again, like, consider me, I for lack of better words, again, I don't even like that whole comrade talk, because everybody comrade. But again, like I said, people still dehumanize each other. So again, I consider, you a sister. Consider me, I would hope, a brother in the struggle. And, please reach out, and please let's, continue to, run and walk in the same direction. And let me know whatever you need. And again, when we do, physically get in the same space, again, it's gonna, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to magnify this, and it's not even about me. I'm trying to create and open opportunities and doors for the youth that we're talking about, no matter where they exist in the world. So, again, thank you for all that you do, all that you are. And, with love, I just, say, peace, and continue, to protect yourself and protect your mind and protect your energy, and preserve yourself.
Thank you so much, man. I do really appreciate this.
No doubt. No doubt. Again, like I said, we're going to do this again. I'm about to stop the recording now.